"You're just useless." The words hung in the salty Miami air between us. My husband of 23 years had just reduced our entire marriage to a single, cutting insult, all because I'd forgotten to pack his favorite sunscreen. I felt something snap inside me. Not break, snap, like a twig that had been bent too far for too long, finally finding its breaking point. In that moment, watching Dan scowl at me across our beachfront dinner table while our college-aged kids scrolled through their phones, oblivious, I made a decision. 3 hours later, I was on my laptop in our hotel bathroom, the shower running to mask the sound. American Airlines, first class, one-way ticket, just my name on the reservation. I never thought I'd be the type of woman to leave her husband stranded at a beach resort. Yet the next morning, as I sipped champagne at 35,000 feet while Dan's increasingly frantic texts lit up my silenced phone, I realized this wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of something I should have started decades ago. I met Dan during my sophomore year at the University of Michigan. He was pre-law, confident, and ambitious, with that Midwestern work ethic his parents had instilled in him growing up in suburban Chicago. I was studying education, the first in my family from small-town Pennsylvania to attend college. We married young, too young looking back, in a traditional church ceremony with 200 guests and a reception at my parents' country club they couldn't really afford. My father had pulled me aside at the rehearsal dinner. "Danny's going places, Ellie. Just make sure you don't hold him back." I'd nodded, taking it as well-intended advice rather than the warning it would become. The early years were a blur of Dan's law school, my teaching career, and eventually the birth of our children, Mia and Tyler. We settled in a leafy Boston suburb with good schools and neighbors who hosted backyard barbecues every 4th of July. On paper, we were living the American dream, but the dynamics shifted so gradually I barely noticed. When Dan made partner at his firm, my teaching job became just a hobby in conversations with his colleagues. When Tyler showed athletic promise, my role became team mom, while Dan coached and received all the praise. When Mia needed help with college applications, Dan's alma mater connections were what mattered, not my hours helping with essays. I remember Thanksgiving at Dan's parents' house when Tyler was 8. I'd spent days cooking dishes to bring: my grandmother's sweet potato casserole, homemade cranberry sauce, a pie with crust from scratch. Dan's mother took one look at my contributions and said, "Oh, honey, we already have all this covered," before relegating my food to a side table. Dan just shrugged when I mentioned it later. "Mom likes things her way, you know that." Then there was my 40th birthday. I'd dropped hints for months about wanting to take a photography class, a passion I'd put aside when the kids were born. Dan surprised me with kitchen appliances. "These will make your life so much easier," he'd said, genuinely believing he'd done well. The class brochure I'd left on his desk sat untouched beneath a stack of his legal briefs. The grand gesture that should have been my wake-up call came 5 years ago. I'd been offered a position as assistant principal at my school, a significant promotion after 15 years of teaching. The same week, Dan was approached about an opportunity in the firm's Miami office. "It's perfect timing," he'd said. "You can take a break from work, get us settled, and find something new once we're there." There was never a discussion about my career. My promotion announcement card sat unsent in my desk drawer as we packed up our Boston life. What Dan didn't know, my secret, was that I'd been quietly building something of my own. What started as an educational blog for parents had grown into a respectable consulting business. I'd been helping families navigate school systems, testing accommodations, and college admissions, all while working remotely under a professional pseudonym. The income went into a separate account, not out of deception, but because Dan had made it clear years ago that my little projects weren't worth tracking in our family finances. In Miami, while Dan built his partnership and the kids finished high school, my business thrived in the shadows of our family life. No one suspected that Dr. Eleanor Wright, whose byline appeared in education journals and whose calendar was filled with virtual client meetings, was just Dan's wife, who supposedly didn't work. This summer was supposed to be special, a family vacation to celebrate Mia's graduation from NYU and Tyler's acceptance to law school. Following in my footsteps, Dan had proudly announced to everyone at his firm's 4th of July party, as if Tyler's accomplishment somehow reflected Dan's own success. I'd spent weeks planning our stay at a luxury beachfront resort in Miami, a place we knew well after 5 years of living in the city, but had never indulged in as tourists. I'd made dinner reservations, researched activities, and even arranged a surprise sunset sailing trip for the family. The tension started building the moment we arrived. Dan immediately complained about the room location, despite my requests during booking for that specific ocean view. "You should have been more specific, Ellie. You know how these places try to give you the worst rooms unless you speak up." Mia had brought her boyfriend Jason along, her first serious relationship, and Dan spent the first day interrogating him about his career plans with the subtlety of a prosecutor. "Dad, stop," Mia had whispered during lunch as Jason excused himself to the restroom. "He's an artist, not a lawyer."
"Get over it." "Artists don't pay for graduate degrees," Dan had replied, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. I'd tried to smooth things over, as usual. "Jason's work is actually being featured in a gallery in Brooklyn next month. Mia showed me some photos. It's really impressive." Dan had just rolled his eyes. "I'm sure it's very creative. Speaking of paying for things, Tyler and I are going to look at apartments in Boston next weekend. We should discuss the budget for that." The conversation shifted, my contribution dismissed as easily as swatting away a beach fly. By day 3, I was exhausted from playing mediator. Tyler had brought his girlfriend Amber, who Dan approved of because she was pre-med, but Mia and Jason were getting the cold shoulder. The kids were bickering like they were teenagers again, and Dan was constantly on his phone with the office, despite promising to disconnect. That evening, we had reservations at the resort's most exclusive restaurant, a place I'd had to call 2 months in advance to secure. Everyone was dressed up, and for once, we looked like the perfect family from our Christmas cards. As we waited for our appetizers, I excused myself to use the restroom. When I returned, I noticed Dan's expression had darkened. He held up his phone. "Care to explain this, Eleanor?" On the screen was an email confirmation, my upcoming keynote speech at an education conference in Boston. I'd been invited as Dr. Eleanor Wright, and it represented a significant milestone for my business. "I was going to tell you after vacation," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "It's a great opportunity." "A great opportunity," Dan repeated, his tone mocking. "And when exactly were you planning to tell me you've been running some sort of business behind my back? Tyler just showed me your website. Dr. Wright? Really, Ellie?" "It's not behind your back," I said. "It's just something I built myself. I have my master's degree, Dan. I'm qualified." "Qualified to what? Embarrass me? My colleagues' wives volunteer for charity boards. They don't pretend to be experts and charge people for advice." The waiter arrived with our appetizers, sensing the tension and quickly retreating. The kids looked uncomfortable. Jason and Amber stared at their plates. "I don't pretend anything," I said quietly. "I've built a legitimate business with real clients. The degree is real, the expertise is real." Mom's actually really good at what she does, Mia interjected. I've read her articles. Dan looked at our daughter incredulously. You knew about this? For about a year, Mia admitted. I found her blog when I was researching something for a friend's brother who has dyslexia. Great, so everyone knows except me. Anything else you're hiding, Ellie? A secret family somewhere? A drug habit? Dan, you're being ridiculous, I said, feeling a flush of anger. This isn't about you. No? Then why hide it? Why the fake name? It's not fake. It's my maiden name and middle name. And I didn't hide it. You never asked. Not once in 5 years have you asked what I do all day while you're at the office. Dan snorted, because I assumed you were shopping or at the spa or whatever it is you do, not pretending to be some expert and taking money from people. The appetizers sat untouched as Dan continued. You know, this explains a lot. The distraction, the meetings you couldn't miss. I've been carrying this family for decades while you've been playing business on the side. That's when he said it, the words that would change everything. You want to know the truth, Ellie? You're just useless. As a partner, you contribute nothing of real value to this family. Never have. The restaurant seemed to go silent around us. Tyler's face flushed with embarrassment. Mia looked like she might cry. But all I felt was a strange, calm clarity washing over me like the ocean waves outside. The silence at our table felt eternal, though it probably lasted only seconds. Around us, other diners continued their conversations, oblivious to the fact that my 23-year marriage had just imploded over scallop appetizers. Nothing of value, I repeated slowly, my voice surprisingly steady. Is that really what you think, Dan? He had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable as heads at nearby tables turned our way, but he doubled down. Look, I didn't mean it like that, but come on, Ellie, playing education consultant under a fake name? It's embarrassing. Something inside me, something that had been bending for decades, finally broke free. You know what's embarrassing, Dan? That I felt I needed to hide my success from my own husband, that I knew instinctively you would diminish it instead of celebrate it. I took a sip of my wine, no longer caring who heard us. Do you want to know how much I made last year as Dr. Eleanor Wright? Dan rolled his eyes. I'm sure it's $173,000, I said, watching his expression shift from dismissal to shock. That's what my playing business brought in. All documented, all taxed, all legitimate. Tyler choked on his water. Mom, seriously? I nodded. Every penny is in a separate account. I've been saving and investing it because I knew, I've always known, that someday I'd need to stand on my own. Dan's face reddened. You've been hiding money? That's completely legal, I finished for him. I've filed taxes properly every year. You just never bothered to look at them before signing. Why would you? Because of exactly this moment, Dan. Because you've spent 23 years making me feel small. Because you moved us to Miami without a single conversation about my career. Because you just called me useless in front of our children. The waiter approached with our entrees, assessed the situation, and wisely retreated again. I've ghostwritten 3 textbooks, I continued, gaining momentum. I have clients who fly me to their homes to help their children. The conference in Boston, they're paying me $15,000 for a 1-hour keynote. Tell me again how I contribute nothing of value. Mia reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Mom, that's amazing. Dan's expression had transformed from anger to something more complicated,
a mixture of confusion and what looked almost like fear. Why didn't you tell me? I tried, Dan, 1,000 times in 1,000 ways. Remember when I wanted to discuss expanding my blog 4 years ago? You told me to keep it as a hobby because we didn't need the money. Remember when I mentioned a client had referred me to others? You said, "That's nice, honey," and changed the subject to your new case. I looked around at our children and their partners, suddenly aware that this very public meltdown would become part of our family lore. But instead of feeling embarrassed, I felt liberated. I'm not useless, Dan. I'm invisible. There's a difference, and it stops tonight. I stood up, placing my napkin beside my untouched plate. I won't be joining you all for dinner. I have some arrangements to make. Mom, Tyler started. It's okay, I assured him. We'll talk later. Enjoy your meals. As I walked away, I heard Dan's voice behind me. Ellie, don't be dramatic. Get back here. We're on vacation. I didn't turn around. In the elevator, I slipped off my wedding ring and placed it in my clutch purse. My hand felt lighter immediately. Back in our suite, I moved methodically. Laptop open. American Airlines website. First-class ticket to Boston for the following morning. One way. Credit card information entered. My credit card. From my account. Confirmation email received. When Dan returned to the room 3 hours later, slightly drunk and ready to continue our argument, I was sitting calmly on the balcony, watching the moonlight dance across the Atlantic. "What the hell was that about?" he demanded. "You humiliated me in front of the kids, in front of strangers." "No, Dan," I said quietly. "You did that all by yourself when you called me useless. I just finally stopped accepting it." The next morning, I was gone before dawn. I left a note for the kids telling them I loved them and would explain everything soon, but I needed space. For Dan, I left nothing but my room key on his nightstand. My phone exploded with notifications during the taxi ride to Miami International. Dan's messages evolved from angry, "This is ridiculous, get back here now," to confused, "Where are you?" to vaguely threatening, "You can't just leave, we need to discuss finances immediately." I silenced his thread and focused on the texts from Mia. "I support you 100%, Mom. Call me when you land." And from Tyler, more cautious but supportive, "Dad's freaking out. Are you okay? Do what you need to do." The first-class lounge felt like a different universe, quiet, civilized, with attendants who asked what I wanted instead of assuming. When I boarded the plane and settled into my spacious seat, the flight attendant smiled. "Traveling for business or pleasure, ma'am?" "Both," I answered, surprising myself. "Definitely both." By the time we landed in Boston, Dan had left 17 voicemails and 32 text messages. I listened to just one. "Eleanor, this isn't funny anymore. The kids are upset. I had to book us all last-minute flights home. This vacation cost a fortune, and you've ruined it for everyone." I deleted the rest without listening and took another taxi, this time to a boutique hotel in Back Bay that I'd booked during my layover. Not our old neighborhood. Not anywhere Dan would think to look for me. I needed clarity before I faced him again. That evening, Mia called. "Mom, are you safe? We're worried." "I'm fine, sweetheart. I'm in Boston, in a nice hotel. I just needed to remove myself from the situation." "Dad's telling everyone you had some kind of breakdown. He says you've been secretly hoarding money and ran off." I laughed despite myself. "Is that what he's saying? Did he mention calling me useless in front of everyone?" "No," she said quietly, "but Jason and I heard everything. So did Tyler and Amber. Dad's spinning his own version, but none of us believe it." We talked for an hour. I learned that after I left, dinner had continued in awkward silence until Tyler confronted his father. "You were way out of line, Dad. Mom's been killing herself for this family for decades." Apparently, Dan had brushed it off as marital issues you kids wouldn't understand and ordered another scotch. What surprised me most was hearing that Amber had stood up to Dan the next morning when he was ranting about my selfish disappearance. "Dr. Porter has been my academic mentor for 2 years," she'd told him. "I just never made the connection that Eleanor Wright was Tyler's mom. She's respected throughout the education community. Everyone at school uses her resources." This revelation that my future daughter-in-law had been using my work without even realizing the connection felt like cosmic validation. My secret professional life wasn't just successful, it was meaningful. The conference in Boston became my coming out party. I delivered my keynote to a standing room only crowd, introducing myself confidently as Dr. Eleanor Wright Porter. Afterward, I was approached by a publishing executive who had been following my blog for years. "We'd love to discuss a book deal," she said, handing me her card. "Your approach to educational advocacy is exactly what parents need right now." 3 days into my self-imposed exile, Tyler flew to Boston. We met for coffee near Fenway Park, where I'd taken him to countless Red Sox games as a child. "Mom, what's the plan here?" he asked, stirring his latte nervously. "Dad's talking about lawyers." "I'm sure he is," I said, "but I'm not making any decisions yet. For the first time in decades, I'm putting myself first." "Are you getting divorced?" The question hung between us. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "That depends on whether your father can see me, really see me, as an equal partner, not just as his wife or your mother, but as Eleanor." Tyler nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, Amber thinks you're badass. She can't stop talking about your research on learning differences." I smiled. "I like her. She's good for you." "Yeah," he agreed. "She doesn't let me get away with anything, kind of like you're not letting Dad get away with anything anymore." That conversation became the first of many healing moments with my children. Mia flew up the following weekend, and we spent 2 days exploring Boston as adults rather than mother and daughter. She confessed that she'd been worried about me for years, watching me shrink in my father's shadow. "I thought that's just how marriage worked," she admitted as we walked along the Charles River. "It scared me, honestly. It's part of why I've been so independent with Jason. I didn't want to disappear like you did." Her words stung, but I needed to hear them. "I didn't disappear," I corrected gently. "I adapted. I found ways to be myself in the spaces I was allowed. But you're right, it wasn't healthy, and it's not what I want for you." The unexpected twist came 3 weeks after my dramatic departure. My attorney, yes, I had my own now, called to inform me that Dan had accessed my business accounts and discovered the full extent of my success. Not just the income, but the client list that included the children of his colleagues, partners at competing firms, and even a federal judge whose grandchild I'd helped navigate dyslexia. "He's gone very quiet," my lawyer reported. "His attorney called today asking about mediation instead of divorce proceedings." That same day, a massive bouquet arrived at my hotel with a card that read simply, "I was wrong. Can we talk? Dan." When we finally met face to face in the neutral territory of a restaurant we'd both always loved, Dan looked different, smaller somehow, without his usual confidence. "You've built something remarkable," he said after we ordered drinks. "I spent a day reading everything you've published, watching videos of your workshops. You're exceptional at what you do." "I know," I said, not to be arrogant, but because it was time to own my value. "The kids won't stop singing your praises," he continued. "Apparently, half of Amber's med school class uses your study method guides." I smiled.
That's nice to hear. Eleanor, he corrected himself. I've been doing a lot of thinking. About us. About how we got here. He paused. I was wrong to call you useless. It was cruel and untrue. But more than that, I've been wrong for years, taking you for granted, assuming my career was the only one that mattered. I sipped my wine, letting him continue. I don't want a divorce, he said finally, but I understand if that's what you want. I don't know what I want yet, I answered truthfully, but I know I'm never going back to being invisible. Whether we stay married or not, I'm Dr. Eleanor Wright professionally and personally from now on. He nodded slowly. I can respect that. I do respect that. That conversation with Dan happened 6 months ago. We're still figuring things out, in counseling twice a week, learning how to truly see and hear each other after decades of miscommunication. I didn't move back to Miami. Instead, Dan has been commuting to Boston every other weekend while we decide our future. He's watching me build my consulting firm into something bigger than I ever imagined, with 3 employees and a waiting list of clients. Sometimes I catch him looking at me with something new in his eyes, not just love or regret, but genuine respect. My first book hits shelves next month. The dedication reads, "To Mia and Tyler, who never saw me as useless, and to my younger self, who finally found her voice." The first-class ticket I bought myself that night in Miami now hangs framed in my office, a reminder that sometimes the bravest journey isn't to an exotic destination, but toward your authentic self. If someone ever makes you feel small, remember, you don't need their permission to be magnificent. Your value isn't determined by their ability to see it. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away, even if it's just long enough to remember who you really are. Life is too short for economy class when you've earned your wings. Take that first-class seat. You deserve it. If my story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and share this video with someone who might need to hear it. Remember, the most important relationship you'll ever have is the one with yourself. Thanks for listening.